Hello?
At 36, life felt like a strange mix of reflection and anticipation. I'd spent the last few years rediscovering myself after my marriage ended. It wasn't easy, but there was something beautiful about rebuilding, about knowing that each day, I was choosing to be the woman I wanted to be, not the woman someone else thought I should be. My ex-husband's voice still echoed in the back of my mind sometimes, telling me that my art wasn't practical, that it wouldn't support our family. I'd put my brushes away for too long, convinced by his words that my passion was just a hobby, not something real or valuable. But those days were over. My balcony, overlooking the sea, had become my haven, where I could pick up my brushes again, lose myself in color and form, and let go of the doubts that once weighed me down. Jack, my son, was off at university now studying architecture. He was 21, full of his own dreams and ideas, and I couldn't be prouder. But with his independence came a shift in our relationship. He no longer needed me in the way he once had. Sometimes, I missed the days when he was small, when his world revolved around me, and I was the center of his universe. But I had to remind myself that this was part of growing up for both of us. He was building his own life, and I had to let him. Still, I wondered if he saw me for who I was now, or if I was just mum to him, the one who cooked his meals, cleaned his clothes, and worried endlessly about his future. Tonight, though, wasn't about those worries. Tonight was about me. I had a corporate party to attend, and though it was for my marketing job, the one I didn't often share much about with Jack, it felt important. It wasn't just a job to pay the bills. It was something that gave me a sense of accomplishment outside of motherhood, outside of teaching. But as I stepped back inside my apartment, my thoughts were drawn to something else entirely. I walked over to my closet and pulled out the emerald green dress I had chosen for the evening. As the fabric slid over my skin, I felt a rush of confidence, a sense of owning this moment for myself. The dress was long and flowing, cinched at the waist in a way that made me feel elegant yet powerful. I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused. I hardly recognized the woman staring back at me. This wasn't the Olivia who stayed up late grading papers, or the Olivia who nagged Jack about keeping his room clean. This was a different Olivia, one who still knew how to feel beautiful. I pinned my hair up in a loose bun, leaving a few strands to frame my face. Then, with deliberate precision, I applied a soft coat of red lipstick. It wasn't too bold, just enough to add a hint of glamour, a reminder to myself that I could still turn heads if I wanted to. Just as I was about to finish, I heard the door to my apartment creak open. I hadn't been expecting anyone, so I was a bit surprised, but my heart fluttered when I saw Jack standing in the doorway. He had come back earlier than I thought. His eyes widened as he took in my appearance, and I couldn't help but smile at his reaction. "Wow, Mum," he said, his voice laced with admiration. "You look incredible." I felt a blush creep up my cheeks, but I tried to play it off. "Thanks," I said, giving a small laugh. "I'm just getting ready for the party." Jack stepped closer, his smile widening as he tilted his head. "I don't think I've ever seen you wear a dress like that." "I don't think I've had many reasons to," I teased, my voice light. I turned back to the mirror, adjusting the straps of the dress. But before I could say anything else, Jack came up behind me, his reflection appearing next to mine. "You look beautiful, Mum," he said, his voice soft, almost reverent. I turned to face him, my heart swelling at the tenderness in his eyes. It wasn't often that we had these kinds of moments, and something about the way he was looking at me made me pause. His hand gently reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear, and in that moment, everything else seemed to fall away. Before I could think, I leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. It was the kind of kiss that held a world of unspoken emotion, a gesture that bridged the gap between mother and son, between the woman I was becoming and the man he was growing into. Jack didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into the kiss, resting his hand lightly on my shoulder, and for a brief moment, we stood there in the soft glow of the setting sun, wrapped in the warmth of a love that went beyond words. I pulled back, smiling softly as our eyes met. There was a newfound understanding between us, something that went beyond the usual mother-son bond. It was a connection that felt deeper, as though Jack was beginning to see me not just as his mum but as a woman with her own life, her own desires, her own journey. "You're going to knock them dead tonight," Jack said with a grin, stepping back and giving me a playful wink. I laughed, shaking my head. I don't know about that, but thank you. As Jack left the room, I stood there for a moment longer, staring at my reflection. I felt beautiful. More than that, I felt seen. It was as though that brief kiss, that small gesture, had unlocked something between us, a new level of respect, of understanding. The party was held at a sleek, modern gallery downtown, a place I'd passed by many times but never had the chance to visit. The white walls, the polished floors, and the soft, ambient lighting created an atmosphere of sophistication that felt worlds away from my usual routine. As I stepped through the doors, wearing the emerald dress and the confidence that came with it, I felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. This wasn't my first time attending a corporate event for my marketing job, but tonight felt different. There was a certain weight to the evening, a significance that went beyond mingling with colleagues. Perhaps it was because I had made a decision, somewhere deep inside, to let myself be fully present, not just as an employee but as a woman who deserved to be seen and appreciated. The gallery was already buzzing with chatter when I arrived, the clinking of glasses and the hum of conversation filling the space. As I made my way through the crowd, I found myself glancing at the paintings on the walls. They were beautiful, no doubt, but there was something missing. I couldn't help but think about my own art, the pieces I'd painted in the quiet hours of the night, the ones that held parts of my soul in them. I wondered what it would feel like to have my own work displayed in a place like this, to have people stop and admire it, to know that it resonated with them. That was a dream I hadn't dared to speak aloud, not even to Jack. I shook off the thought, reminding myself that tonight wasn't about me. It was about the job. The marketing role I'd taken on had allowed me to support myself and Jack, and for that I was grateful. But there was always a part of me that longed for more, for the freedom to pursue my passion without the constraints of practicality weighing me down. As I made my way to the bar to grab a drink, I felt a familiar presence beside me. I turned, and there he was, Liam, my boss. He was tall, with a casual charm that always seemed to put people at ease. He smiled when he saw me, his eyes briefly scanning my dress before meeting mine. "Olivia, you look fantastic," he said, leaning in slightly as he spoke. "That color suits you." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a flutter in my chest. Liam had always been kind, but tonight there was something different in his gaze. Something that felt a little more personal. We exchanged small talk about the event, the artwork, and the recent marketing campaigns we'd been working on. But there was an underlying tension between us, a subtle shift in the way his eyes lingered on mine, or how his hand brushed lightly against my arm when he made a point. It wasn't overt, but it was enough to make me acutely aware of the space between us, or lack thereof. "Have you had a chance to look at the paintings?" he asked, nodding toward the gallery walls. "Not yet," I admitted, glancing around. "I was just about to." "Well, let me show you some of my favorites," he said, gesturing for me to follow him. As we walked through the gallery, Liam pointed out various pieces, sharing his thoughts on the different styles and techniques. I listened, nodding along, but my mind kept drifting to the way his voice softened when he spoke to me, the way he seemed to gravitate closer with each step we took. There was something in the air between us that hadn't been there before, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it. At one point, we stopped in front of a large abstract painting, swirls of blue and green cascading across the canvas. Liam stepped closer, his shoulder brushing against mine as he looked at the piece. "This one reminds me of you," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned to him, surprised. "Why is that?" He smiled, a slow, almost teasing smile. "Because it's bold, but there's a softness to it, like it's daring you to look closer, to see the details beneath the surface." My breath caught in my throat. There was no mistaking the way he was looking at me now, the intensity in his eyes as he spoke. For a moment, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something thrilling and terrifying all at once. Before I could respond, a voice broke through the moment. "Mum." I turned quickly, my heart skipping a beat as I saw Jack standing at the entrance of the gallery, his tall frame unmistakable even from across the room. He was with a couple of his friends, and for a brief moment, I felt a wave of panic. I hadn't expected him to show up tonight, and suddenly, I was hyper-aware of everything. My dress, the way Liam was standing so close to me, the fact that this part of my life had always been kept separate from Jack. For a moment, I stood there in stunned silence, staring at my paintings hanging on the gallery wall. I hadn't expected them to be displayed here. And now, seeing them in the same room as the work of established artists, I felt a strange mix of pride and vulnerability. My heart pounded as I turned to look at Jack, who was still smiling at me, his eyes full of admiration. "Jack, I didn't know," I began, but before I could finish my sentence, I felt a presence behind me. Liam had followed me across the gallery, standing just a few steps away. His gaze flickered between me and my son, and though his expression was polite, I could sense something more in his eyes, something personal, almost intimate. "These are yours?" Liam asked, his voice low, as if he understood the significance of the moment. I nodded, feeling my cheeks flush slightly. "Yes, but I didn't know they would be part of the exhibition." "I'm surprised." Liam's lips curved into a soft smile. "You shouldn't be. They're stunning, Olivia. Truly." His words sent a shiver down my spine. There was something about the way he said my name, the way he looked at me, that made my pulse quicken. Before I knew it, Liam stepped closer, his hand brushing against my arm as he turned to face me fully. The gallery's ambient hum seemed to fade into the background, and all I could feel was the electricity between us. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice so low that only I could hear it. "I've wanted to tell you this for a while now, but tonight, seeing you like this, I can't hold back anymore." My breath caught in my throat as I realized where this was going. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, Liam leaned in, his hand gently cupping my cheek. And then his lips were on mine. The kiss was soft at first, tender, as if testing the waters. But as soon as I responded, my lips parting slightly, my hand instinctively reaching for his shoulder, the kiss deepened. It was a kiss that held years of unspoken words, of longing, of something neither of us had acknowledged until now. For a brief, fleeting moment, I forgot everything else. The gallery, the people, even Jack. All that existed was Liam. The way his hand slipped to the small of my back, the way his breath mingled with mine, the heat of his touch sending sparks through my skin. But then, reality crashed back in. I pulled away suddenly, my heart racing, and turned to see Jack standing a few feet away, his expression frozen in shock. My stomach twisted into knots as I realized what had just happened. Jack had seen everything. For a split second, I panicked. I could see the confusion, the hurt, and maybe even a hint of betrayal in his eyes. But I didn't want him to misunderstand. I didn't want him to think that this kiss, this moment, had somehow taken away from the bond we shared. Without thinking, I stepped toward Jack and, in a gesture that felt both instinctive and desperate, I kissed him. Not on the cheek, as I had earlier, but on the lips, softly, tenderly. It was a kiss filled with the love of a mother for her son, but also something more, a reassurance, a promise that nothing had changed between us. Jack blinked, surprised, but he didn't pull away. His hands came up, resting lightly on my shoulders as he kissed me back, his touch gentle and almost uncertain. The kiss was brief, but it carried all the weight of our relationship, of the years we had spent together, of the bond that would never be broken. When I pulled back, I looked into Jack's eyes, searching for any sign of what he might be feeling. His expression was softer now, the confusion giving way to something else. Understanding, maybe. Or perhaps just acceptance. "I'm still your mom," I whispered, my voice shaky but firm. "That hasn't changed. It never will." Jack nodded slowly, his gaze steady as he looked at me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The gallery, the paintings, even Liam standing a few feet away, all of it seemed to blur into the background as Jack and I stood there, caught in a moment of clarity. Finally, Jack gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I know," he said quietly. "I know, Mum." Relief flooded through me. Once outside, the cool night air hit me like a balm, calming the racing in my heart. Jack walked beside me, his steps measured but calm, his presence a grounding force. It wasn't until we reached a secluded spot by the gallery entrance, a quiet stretch of sidewalk overlooking the ocean, that I finally exhaled fully, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged with everything left unsaid. I could feel the weight of Jack's thoughts pressing against the silence, the questions he wasn't asking but that hung in the air. I wasn't sure where to start, or if I even should. Part of me feared that explaining what had happened with Liam might break whatever fragile understanding we had reached. But then, Jack did something unexpected. He reached out, his hand lightly brushing mine. A simple gesture that reminded me of all the times we'd navigated challenges together. In that moment, it wasn't about what had happened or what it meant. It was about the unbreakable connection we shared as mother and son, a bond that had weathered far worse storms than this. I squeezed his hand gently, grateful for his quiet strength, and we stood there in the crisp night air, letting the sound of the waves crashing against the shore fill the silence between us. There was a kind of peace in that moment, a pause in the chaos of emotions, where I could finally breathe. And as I stood there beside Jack, I realized something important. No matter what happened with Liam, no matter how complicated or confusing it might be, my relationship with my son would always come first. Nothing would ever take that away from me. From us. The night continued to unfold around us, with the distant sounds of the gallery fading as more people left the party. But the moment felt suspended in time. Just me and Jack, standing together beneath the stars, each of us holding on to what mattered most. Eventually, we made our way back home. The walk filled with quiet conversation about everything but what had transpired at the gallery. Jack asked about my paintings, about the creative process behind them, his curiosity piqued by seeing them on display. The questions were thoughtful, genuine, and I answered with a sense of pride, knowing that he was seeing me not just as his mother, but as someone with her own passions and talents. There was something deeply fulfilling in that realization, in knowing that my son was beginning to understand the fullness of who I was. When we finally reached our home, Jack opened the door for me, and we stepped inside, the warmth of our familiar space wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. He offered to make tea, and I didn't protest this time. I watched as he moved about the kitchen, the glow of the overhead light casting soft shadows across the room. It was a simple moment, but one that held a deep sense of connection, a mutual respect that hadn't always been there but had grown through the years. As I sank into the sofa, still wearing the emerald dress and feeling the weight of the evening settle in, I let out a deep sigh. Jack returned with 2 mugs of tea, setting one down in front of me before settling into the armchair across from me. His expression was relaxed now, the tension from earlier having faded. I glanced down at my hands, noticing faint paint stains still lingering on my fingers, evidence of my late-night sessions spent working on those very paintings that had now hung in the gallery. Jack noticed too, a soft chuckle escaping his lips as he teased me lightly about my dedication to the craft. As the evening wore on, Jack pulled out one of his architectural sketches to show me. He explained how he had been inspired by some of the elements in my paintings, and as he talked about the design, I realized just how much we had influenced each other. It was a powerful reminder of how connected our lives had become, not just as mother and son, but as 2 individuals who shared a deep love for creativity and expression. In that moment, watching Jack speak passionately about his design, I felt a sense of awe. We had come so far, had grown so much, and despite the confusion and emotions of the night, we were still here, together, stronger than ever. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. The kiss with Liam, Jack's reaction, the quiet understanding we had reached, all of it swirled together, leaving me with a mix of emotions. But above all, I felt grateful. Grateful for the bond one shared with my son, for the strength of our relationship, and for the fact that, no matter what happened, we would always find our way back to each other. As sleep finally claimed me, I knew that the road ahead might be complicated, but I wasn't afraid. Not with Jack by my side. One late afternoon, after a particularly productive day at the office, Liam asked me to stay behind to go over some marketing reports. I agreed, more out of habit than any conscious decision, but as the hours passed and the office began to empty, I felt the tension building between us. The quiet of the workspace, the dimming light outside, it all created a sense of isolation, of intimacy. As we sat together, poring over the documents, I could feel his eyes on me, his gaze lingering a little too long. My heart began to race, the memory of our kiss flashing in my mind. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but every time our hands brushed or our eyes met, the air seemed to crackle with unspoken desire. And then it happened again. Liam stood up from his desk, walking around to stand beside me, his hand resting on the back of my chair. I looked up at him, my breath catching in my throat as our eyes met, and before I could say anything, he leaned down, his lips brushing mine in a soft, deliberate kiss. This time I didn't pull away. The kiss deepened quickly, fueled by all the pent-up feelings we had been avoiding. His hand slid to the back of my neck, holding me close, and I let myself fall into the moment, into the heat and intensity of it, into the feeling of being wanted, of being seen. My hands instinctively reached for him, pulling him closer, and for a brief moment, the rest of the world ceased to exist. But just as the kiss reached its height, I heard a sound, a quiet gasp from the doorway. I pulled away sharply, my heart pounding, and turned to see Jack standing there, his eyes wide with shock, disbelief written all over his face. He had seen everything. My stomach twisted in guilt, panic rising in my chest. Jack was the last person I wanted to hurt, the last person I wanted to misunderstand what he had just witnessed. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the mixture of emotions warring within him, and I knew I had to act quickly before that moment spiraled into something I couldn't fix. Without thinking, I rushed over to him, my heart in my throat. The look on his face made my chest ache, and in a moment of instinctive, desperate love I kissed him. It was a tender kiss, soft and full of reassurance. One meant to show him that, no matter what, I was still his mother, that nothing had changed between us. It wasn't romantic, but it was full of meaning, a gesture that transcended words. Jack stood still, caught off guard by my sudden action, but he didn't pull away. His hands came up, gently resting on my arms, as if he was seeking comfort in the familiar, in the connection we had always shared. The kiss didn't last long, but it was enough. It was everything I needed to tell him, without saying a word. When I pulled back, I looked into his eyes, searching for understanding, for forgiveness. His expression had softened, the initial shock fading into something more, perhaps acceptance, or at least a willingness to move forward. There was still confusion there, but it wasn't the kind that threatened to break us apart. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Jack gave a small, hesitant nod, his grip on my arms tightening for a brief second before he let go. His gaze flickered to Liam, then back to me, and though the silence hung heavy between us, there was a shared acknowledgement that this wasn't the end. It was just a moment, a complicated, messy moment, but one we would get through together. Liam, sensing the intensity of the situation, remained quiet, allowing us the space to navigate this delicate balance. And for that I was grateful. There would be time to address everything later, to make sense of the tangled web we had created. But for now, all that mattered was Jack and me, our bond, our love, and the unshakable foundation that had always carried us through. As the evening drew to a close, I walked with Jack back toward the door, my hand resting lightly on his arm. The weight of the evening was heavy on my shoulders, but there was also a quiet sense of relief. We had made it through the hardest part, the moment of confrontation. And though things were far from resolved, I knew we would find our way. And as we stepped out into the night, the cool air wrapping around us, I felt a glimmer of hope.
Bye-bye!